And thank you to our capacity crowd today. This is our Best Rules and Elections Committee special meeting attendance, I think, in some time. Thank you to everybody who's taken time to be here today. This is Wednesday, September 29th, 2010, and we're in room 1050 of City Hall, a little bit after 3 p.m. We have Council Member Janice Hahn here to form a quorum, and we're also joined by Council Member and President Pro Tem Jan Perry. I think we're going to see Council Member Jose Wesar in a little bit as well. But we're talking about the March ballot today. This is not the last hearing we'll have on March ballot measures, since there are some other ones too that are waiting to be transmitted, but the ones that are ready for transmittal are here today. So if you don't mind, Mr. Seal, why don't you walk us through all of them that are before us again, kind of a la our town hall hearings
I'd be happy to.
On the DWP reform, and then we'll come back and take them one at a time.
Charles Modick, the CLA's office. Before you is a 6-item agenda, most of the items of which relate to proposed charter amendments and proposed items for the March 2011 ballot. The first item relates to a CLA-CAO report on establishing certain requirements for the city's reserve fund. Items 2, 3, I believe 4 and 6 relate to various changes with the city's election code for different requirements for elections and different ways of having them. One on vote-by-mail elections, one on ranked choice voting, and one is on different campaign contribution restrictions for people who have contracts with the city. Item number 5 is a city attorney report relative to ballot measures that would repeal parts of the city charter that were deemed unconstitutional per U.S. Supreme Court decisions. Item number 6 covers items 2, 3, and 3, and again relates to various reforms in city electoral policies.
Okay. I think what we'll do is we'll take up item number 1 first. Ms. Perry is here, I know, on that one. We'll take 2, 3, and 6 together following that, and then we'll do 4 and 5 to close it out. So with that, why don't we start with item number 1?
Item number 1 is a CLA-CAO report relative to a proposed charter amendment to establish certain requirements for the city's reserve fund.
CLA and CAO, like ebony and ivory, working in perfect harmony. All right, who wants to go first?
I'll go ahead and start off. Ray Shwana with the Office City Administrative Officer. Before you today is a report from our respective offices dealing with a potential charter amendment on the reserve fund. As sort of a background information, I'm sure the committee knows we do have an existing city policy that basically sets up the reserve fund, the 2 accounts, and how are they to be used and dispersed. What this proposed charter amendment does is basically put this, as I just said, sort of in the charter. Just really outlines and puts it in a very formal policy, sort of our existing, sort of city policy now. So with that, we do have the 2 accounts. We do have the emergency reserve account, which is right now set at 2.75% of the general fund revenue. We do then have the contingency account, which will be set at some amount over and above that. Our goal ultimately is get to the 5%. We actually got there for a brief period last year. We are below that now, but we would like to eventually get to the 5% goal. I can go into sort of more of the detail stuff and the uses of the emergency account, likewise on the contingency, but I'll let Sharon, if she wants to add any comments.
Essentially, this would just codify what we have had with regard to the reserve fund policy. As you know, the reserve fund policy was established maybe about a decade and a half ago, and it was incorporated as part of the general city financial policies. But as with any policy, it is subject to change, and it changes with a vote of the council and the concurrence of the mayor. By having it in the charter, it codifies it, and it does not allow that discretion in terms of the minimal requirements. As part of the proposed language, however, it does allow these funds to be used for emergency situations, but it also stipulates requirements for replenishment of that fund. And so this is essentially what is before you is codifying what we've had as an existing policy and making it actually a little bit more difficult for us in the future to take monies from the reserve fund, and also establishing a reserve fund that's high enough to assist the city in difficult financial times. So as Ray indicated, it would establish basically two accounts within the reserve fund. One account would be the emergency, and it would require certain declarations by the mayor and council to actually access those funds. The second account would be the contingency amount, which more commonly is used for shortfalls that occur during the budget, whether it be for revenue shortfall or an overt expenditure by a department. And so those would be the two accounts that would be established.
Just a quick question on this, and I was joking with Ms. Hahn because when we served on budget and finance, and Ms. Perry's work as well on this. This is something obviously for many years that we've been trying to build up, and I think it's great, Ms. Perry, that you've put forward something to put this in the charter itself. As this would codify it, I assume that, or maybe our city attorney might even need to speak to it, that this is a projected balance throughout the year because we have cash flow in which sometimes we don't have necessarily 2.75, but it's projected if every else thing comes in that the balanced budget, it is a 2.75 ongoing, even if we're waiting for sales tax to come in or waiting for property tax to come in, right? And we wouldn't be in violation of this policy if at a certain year somebody freeze-framed and we were under that, as long as we still have the projected 2.75 for the year. Is that correct?
That's correct. And essentially when the controller closes the books on June 30th of every year, there is a report that actually comes to the council, and it should be coming to you soon. The books were just closed, whereby there is a total amount that is determined. And right off the bat, before anything else is done, the 2.75% as established by the council policy right now is set aside and put in the emergency reserve, and the rest of it is placed into the contingency. The emergency amount actually stays constant throughout the year, so there isn't money moving in and out of there. But the contingency, monies do come in, and they also get transferred out, so that does fluctuate during the year.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, for letting me speak today at Rules and Elections. I think we're all pretty familiar with the fact that our city and our state are in the midst of some of the most challenging economic times that we have ever faced in our lifetimes, and that we still are in an ongoing fragile fiscal condition. The council over the past budget year has made some very tough decisions on department consolidations, furloughs, layoffs, and reducing our own office budgets. Now, it would have been an easy way out of this to just deplete our savings, but doing so would have been a one-time answer to an ongoing problem. Depleting our savings contributes to our financial instability and would leave the city vulnerable should an unexpected event occur requiring the use of our emergency reserve funds. We only need to look at the events of the not-so-distant past and how important it is to maintain a healthy emergency reserve fund. The 1991 El Nino flood, 1992 civil unrest, the 1994 Northridge earthquake, just to name a few incidents. With this in mind, I introduce the motion to establish this charter amendment that requires that 2.75% of the general fund receipts be dedicated to the emergency reserve account. This will make it more difficult for us to view this account as a quick fix to our annual budget issues. It will require 2/3 vote of the council with mayoral concurrence in order to use emergency reserve funding, and maintaining a minimum reserve balance will assist us and strengthen us with our bond rating. Obtaining a favorable bond rating and low interest rate always saves the city millions of dollars each year when the Chief Administrative Office goes out for the tax revenue anticipation notes. I hope the committee will stand with me today to adopt the recommendations in the report and move forward to council for approval of this ballot measure. I believe that it's going to help us maintain the city in a manner that is fiscally sound, especially as we continue to endure these significant economic challenges. I believe also that it's important policy that we should codify and makes a statement that we are serious about keeping our city on firm financial footing. I'd also like to note that while my motion called for this measure to be considered for the November ballot, and that is reflected in the draft resolution. I would like to revise any reference to November 2010 in the motion, in the report, and I know I caught it in 2 instances in the proposed language that is underlined, and change that to municipal ballot in March 2011. And I appreciate the sound advice from the Chief Legislative Analyst in delaying this action and looking towards the March 2011 ballot, in that delaying this action actually saved the city over $4 million.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. Ms. Hahn.
I was just going to maybe direct this to our city attorney. And I understand that there would be a way to ultimately access the reserve, this emergency reserve form account, either by 2/3 vote of the council with the mayor's concurrence, or a 3/4 vote of the council. So would that be similar to making findings for, Rule 23, basically, as long as we vote to find it for urgent economic necessity, as long as the council finds that, would there have to be criteria that was substantiated in that, or are we seeing that as just sort of like the findings for Rule 23? As long as you've got the 10 votes, we made the findings.
I think with this, it's more of a vote counting mechanism regarding the will of a supermajority. There's no real state requirement regarding that I'm aware of, but we're researching that regarding the supermajority being required to tap into the reserve fund. So it's more of a device so that council can't get the, access to it with just a majority.
Yeah, so there's not going to be real criteria for us to make the findings.
Well, you might be right. It might be something between. It has to be a
urgent
declaration.
economic necessity could be in the eye of the accessor.
It has some language in the report.
I was going to offer, yes. There is
that's
some
okay,
language,
right?
and
Okay.
certainly we can work with the city attorney to try to tighten that or strengthen that language. But it does say urgent economic necessity that may include, but not limited to, a significant economic downturn after the budget is adopted, an earthquake or other natural disaster, civil unrest, or other significant unanticipated events requiring general fund resources.
But not limited to, which means if we have the 10 votes, we've made our findings.
10
It's up to
vote-
the council to make those findings.
Right, the council would make the findings.
Right.
10 votes with the mayor's concurrence, 12
Well,
votes
with
without requiring mayor's
right.
concurrence.
Okay.
It says the basis on which a finding of urgent economic necessity may be made. So-
Made, but it's all going to be made.
But not
Include-
limited to.
Yeah,
Maybe we
right.
can, between here and council, we can work with Ms. Perry and Ms. Hahn and see what we can do to tighten that up, instead of it not just saying may include, but,
What would you?
Well,
what
I
would
don't know.
you-
I'm actually leaning towards not.
oh, you want the other, you want it
yeah.
to be looser?
I don't want it to be necessarily looser, but I do think I think the significance is, as was, it's a supermajority.
Mhm.
Council makes the finding, so
Yeah.
it's more than 8 votes.
Yeah.
And I think maybe sometimes you can't even think about what may
Yeah.
ultimately be. So,
Right.
yeah, I would not be in favor of tightening that. I was just trying to get a sense of how we ultimately see it. If it ever had to be accessed, how does that happen? So it's basically the council making findings that it's an urgent economic necessity.
I think that the worldwide global recession is something that we could not have anticipated.
Right, we wouldn't have even,
While you
right.
may argue that we could have anticipated the 1992 civil unrest, maybe.
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 Right.
Those are
Right.
not acts of God,
Right, right.
like a flood, or an earthquake, or something like that.
Right.
And if we can also just mention, since the emergency reserve fund was created, or the emergency account was created, because of the strong fiscal actions taken by the mayor and council, we have not actually had to access it at any point since its establishment.
I haven't really read about that in many newspapers. Anyway. Well, thank you for letting us know that piece of history. And congratulations to my colleagues for that good work. Okay, so we'll keep as is and then
Yeah.
move forward. Okay.
Yeah.
Without objection then, we'll move it forward. Thank you. No, it's just, Weston's the third.
Oh, so you're just.
He's here for his items, just like
Okay.
for your
All right,
Learning
thank
from the city attorney here.
you. Oh, okay.
Trouble.
Yep.
flashbacks, right?
Ooh, yeah.
We are going to take up Mr. Wesar, the three together, so it's like 2, 3, and 6, since they're all interrelated. 6 is the enabling of 2 and 3. So we'll consider those together. Why don't we start with public comment, and then we will, unless we actually have cards so far. Oh, we have some more? Do folks prefer to hear the presentation first and then comment?
Yes.
All right. I heard one yes. Anybody against that? No, okay. We try to run vaguely fair elections here in Rules and Elections. Okay, 1 for 3, gotcha. So let us have city staff come forward. Kathy wins 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, but we'll keep the card up here. All right, sort out how we do these. Hello.
Hello.
You want to present anything on the reports?
What I could do is, since the last time we met on this particular issue was early in this year, I could give just a little bit of background of.
Sure. Why don't you do, I mean, for those of us that have been part of
Yeah,
it, we'd
sure.
assume some new people are here, kind of give us a little bit of the history of the number of
Okay, so
discussions we've had on this, and then kind of where
okay,
you're at.
we'll address the all vote by mail issue, and Holly will take care of the ranked choice voting portion.
Great.
So as a little bit of background, city voter turnout in citywide elections does lag well behind city voter turnout in state and federal elections. Approximately 30% turnout in mayoral elections and 15% in non-mayoral. The city's largest turnout to date was in the June 2001 mayoral election, which had a record 38% turnout. Our city clerk election division, which also administers the LA USD and LA Community College District board seats, represent the second largest election jurisdiction in the state of California. We have 2 million registered voters, over 2,000 voting precincts, 8,000 poll workers, and an operating budget of approximately 17 million. The use of vote by mail as a voting procedure in Los Angeles has increased steadily over time. 22% in 97, 28% in 2005, and 37% in 2009. For any city municipal election, we can expect 30 to 40,000 voters applying for a vote by mail ballot. Also, since 2001, voters have had the opportunity to become what we call permanent vote by mail voters, PVBMs. As an example, in the city's 2009 mayoral election, there were over 233,000 permanent vote by mail ballots, or 13% of the total electorate. It's interesting to note, though, that for that particular election in March 2009, we had 13% permanent vote by mail people that were registered, but they returned their ballots at a rate of 37%. We had a much smaller group of regular vote by mails, about a fifth of that amount, but their return rate was much higher, 62%. And I suppose there could be a philosophy that people that vote by mail may decide to do so because of the particular race or issue before them, whereas permanent vote by mail folks do not always are aware that there is an election happening at the time. Now, if we were to apply all vote by mail methodology, no precincting, throughout the city of Los Angeles, I must tell you that it would be exorbitantly expensive. We would require a new from-scratch electronic voting system at a very vast cost. We would also see a nearly 700% increase in workload. Our 80 temporary and full-time staff would need to increase to about 560 people. And we would need the requisite workspace and storage space. The reason why is because we would, if the city went with all vote by mail, we would highly recommend that you do it combined with what's called the neighborhood voting centers. And these is a modest amount of neighborhood centers, like a precinct, where folks could drop off their ballot if they didn't mail it in on time, get advice, talk to a human face, and also allow people more of a personal voting experience, which many groups feel is very important, instead of just putting it in the mail. If we were to have
That was for citywide, I'm sorry?
yeah.
Okay.
If we were to do citywide vote by mail combined with neighborhood voting centers, what's going to happen is all ballot types would have to be made available at every voting center. So it would be a cumulative effect. We would need a vast amount of paper. Manpower would be required to verify voters' eligibility. Our vote recorder machines would not be usable because right now it's only specific to one ballot type. Standalone paper ballots would be problematic due to all the races needing to be on all the ballots. Repeat, all the races needing to be on all the ballots. Then you add on top of that the necessary translation. The only way we would be able to deal with this is, again, a new from-scratch electronic voting system, all of which is requiring purchase at vast cost to the city. However, if we were to do vote by mail in single district elections only, if there was a vacancy in a council seat in CD2 or CD5 or CD12 or 13, this would actually result in cost savings. As an example, the recent CD2 special election, we were allocated about $2 million for that. We actually used about half that amount, but I must tell you that's because this particular election ran especially problem-free. You can never predict. You request the funding based on every worst-case scenario. If the election goes well, which we always hope it does, you are able to return, a significant portion back to the reserve fund. If this special election had been run by all vote by mail, the cost would have been about $1.14 million, which is essentially a wash on which we actually spent, but the turnout may have been higher than the turnout of 16% that we experienced in that election. Again, doing vote by mail with neighborhood voting centers, say 10 neighborhood voting centers within that council district in a special election situation, could be done quite inexpensively. The cost to establish, say, 10 neighborhood voting centers in that district would be about $10,000. That would include stipend and supplies cost. Our election division is capable of handling vote by mail ballots for up to 165,000 registered voters. And that's the number of registered voters in the city's most populated council district. So doing it citywide would be exorbitantly expensive. We don't have the equipment for it. However, doing it in special elections, we are totally capable of doing, and we would be at your service to do that if that is the will of the council. And of course, that would involve a charter change, and I would defer to the city attorney to elaborate on exactly the wording that would be required in that respect. And so my staff is here to answer any questions or however you want to proceed.
Okay. Let's see if there's a few questions, and we'll take public comment, and then we'll make some other comments after that. A couple things. If this were to be put on the ballot for the special elections and passed in March, how quick a turnaround time could we be looking at? I mean, if there's an open election, hypothetically, a couple months later, could
no
capacity, or do you need years of time to get ready?
The city's election code has to be changed by ordinance, and that ordinance must be in effect at least 6 months. So you would have to factor in the time after the March election is certified at the state of California level, and then the city council would put the implementing ordinance in place, and that ordinance must be effective for a period of 6 months. And then whatever special election happened after that would come under the jurisdiction of the...
6 months would be enough time for you all logistically, though, to be ready, is what I'm asking. I mean,
Yes.
Is there anything...
Oh, yeah, if that was your question.
And in 1997, when this was put before the voters and it was rejected, what was that vote on? And does anyone around here from city staff have any institutional memory of what the arguments made were, or why? All right. Institutional memory.
No, I just looked it up before we came. Harith Trivedi from the city.
You're way too young to have even known what was happening.
I don't know about that. In 97, there was a ballot measure that offered a few different reforms of our election. One was the capacity for council to change the date of the election. The other part of it was to order a particular election to be conducted all vote by mail. And I think the results were 57-44 against, something like that. So,
And but they were linked together?
they were linked together to a single
So people
measure.
might have been voting against one part
That's
of it,
right.
not
It's
the
hard
other.
to say why people voted against it, but
Okay.
and there were a few other smaller changes in there as well.
Okay. Ms. Hanna, Mr. Wesar?
You know, I know that we in LA County we're much lower in vote by mail percentages than like Northern California. And what do we think is the reason for that? I mean, aren't they like something like 60-70% vote by mail in Northern California?
We would have no information on why.
Why we never get any feedback on why we have that. How about, do we know that, you're telling me that 13% of registered voters in the city hold permanent
Yes.
vote by mail status. Do we know what their voting record is? Like what's their percentage of voting?
I only have the statistics for the last election, for the March 2009, but if you would like permanent vote by mail over time, I can do that for you.
I mean, I'd like to see, are they better voters? Are they more regular voters? Are they, I mean, I would just like to see what their voting record is. I know my mother is a permanent vote by mail. She never misses an election, but I don't know about the rest of them. It would be an interesting statistic to have. And to the neighborhood vote centers, do they look like a polling place? Do they act like a polling place?
Yes, they would act like a polling.
They would act like a polling place. Same, you have the people
Right.
set up.
It's to answer the concern that some people really still want to go to the polls.
Right.
And there are some concerns that some people either don't trust the mail or
Right.
it's just their constitutional duty. There
Right.
are a whole population in our country that
Right, like to walk in and speak to the poll
and
workers and
it
have a donut.
makes them feel part of the process.
Right. Would we have less of these?
That's the whole point, is instead of several hundred precincts, we would move from a precinct model to a limited number of,
Like, how many citywide do you think?
we were thinking of 10 for a council district.
10 for a council
Mm-hmm.
district.
So it'd be 150 citywide if it was a citywide election.
And where did you come up with that number?
I think it was just a round number. I mean, I don't know that there's any.
Okay. And this would just
We would need
be,
to look into that further as far as,
but this would be for dropping off your vote by mail ballot.
or getting assistance. Yeah, we would have.
It wouldn't be, you wouldn't have the ballots in these.
Yes, we would have.
Oh,
to
you would
ballots.
have the ballot.
Yes,
Okay,
it would
be
have to
just like a
operate.
polling place.
It would have to operate as a polling place.
Okay.
Which
I
explain,
thought you said these were just for places for people to come and drop off their.
they can drop them off, or the difficulty comes in is if we did this citywide, then every voting center would have to have the data for all ballots, and it would just be in a huge amount.
Because you can come from any part of town to any.
Correct. You could live in Crenshaw and then go to the west side, and your issues would be duplicated over there.
There's 103 different ballot types in the last election, so that just gives you an idea of how many different ballots that are out there. And as we do not currently have the capacity to produce an on-demand ballot, we would have. That's why we just don't have the system right now to conduct it city-wide, either by the voting system or by the ballots. So that's why the only thing we would be prepared to do and are happy to do would be the vote by mail with the voting centers, which would be
A polling
a
place.
polling place. For people who needed assistance or language
just wanted-
assistance or special needs assistance or just wanted to.
Just, yeah, well, you wouldn't even have to say that. I mean, if it's a polling
No.
place, it's a polling place.
It's a
You don't
polling-
really have to designate what,
Right.
so we would have a vote by mail election and polling places together,
A limited amount.
a limited amount.
But it would still require a charter change.
That would still require charges. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Weezer?
Yes, thank you. And first, let me begin by saying that this item has been around since we asked the voters back in '97. It's also something that our former city clerk, Frank Martinez, was a supporter of. And now it comes about through a result of several forums that I held with some of the leading experts in this area that participated in 2 forums to talk about how we could improve our elections and voter participation. And this was one of the items that came up and was recommended as something that the city of Los Angeles should move on to increase voter participation rates. We've heard from our clerk in terms of our low participation rates in the city, and I believe after looking at the data, looking at the research, hearing from our experts that this is the right way to go. I also agree, as our clerk has mentioned, that we have to go about it slowly. We can't jump into it, both because I don't think our voters will be prepared for such a dramatic change, and secondly, we're not in a place to financially afford it at this time to really make that quick of a jump into a full citywide vote-by-mail program. In discussions with the clerk, we realized that we should, and at her recommendation, that perhaps we go to the special elections first and see how that works as a pilot. And given the ordinance requirements and everything that has to be in place, we think if we enact this and the voters approve it, we're thinking that we probably not see this in place till 2012. Now, for those of us who believe that this is the right way to go and strongly believe that this will raise voter participation, we think it's a little slow, but looking at reality, the finances, the education that needs to take place, we've come to accept that that is the right route to go. And so perhaps if we go through the special election, we probably won't see this till the first time in 2012. Now, one idea that I had in discussing with my staff was that perhaps instead of quickly jumping to 10 from in a district of the voting centers, about how many polling places are there now per district on average? About 100 or so?
No.
Would you say?
Yeah.
200?
Like 200.
100,
Between 100 and
depending on
200.
population.
Yeah, between 100 and 200. If we were to reduce down to 10 dramatically, one idea we had was to start scaling down, not make that dramatic jump from 200 to 10 or 200 to 20, but perhaps start scaling down the amount of voting centers as people get used to this and get more comfortable with this, and if we ever do go citywide, depending upon the outcomes of the special elections. But one thing I wanted to ask is the clerk. Now, would it be cost prohibitive to go citywide further down the line in the future completely, or would you say that if we take this step-by-step pilot that we eventually
It all
could get there?
hinges on whether we can get the accredited equipment to do it.
Okay,
It
so
all
it hinges on two
the
things.
equipment.
The accredited equipment, and secondly, if we realize if we want to, we could do it. We could spend the money, but we want to watch how much money we're spending in elections. But if we scale down on the number of polling places and the administrative costs associated with that, eventually some of that starts to work out and iron itself out, correct, in terms of costs?
I think what I hear you saying is, what if we were not to start with a discrete number of 10 at first? What if we were to try 50? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
And the next
that's-
year try 30, and next try... we could put some numbers together as to what the cost differential would be with a higher number of neighborhood voting centers. But if, let me look really
I
quickly.
guess it would depend on what your goal is. If your goal is to save money, or is it to increase voter turnout? If it's both, clearly the more polling places you have,
I mean,
the higher
honestly,
your
yeah.
cost is.
I think our goal is to
However-
increase voter turnout, and saving money is extra benefit
Right.
to that. But
But we
I-
could certainly.
There's
I
no
mean, I
price
think
for
it's
democracy.
A legal, if there was any minimum number that we would have to have.
but-
I was going to add, excuse me, but I was just because I'm concerned about the number of polling places, the 10. That's why I asked that question. I'm very uncomfortable with having 10 polling places in a council district. And I'm wondering if we could even, kind of be held liable for limiting people's access to voting. I mean, the whole goal was bringing polling places in people's neighborhoods, walking distance, people who don't have transportation. I think I'm wondering if this could set us up for some kind of a, limiting people's access to their right to vote. Something to look into.
Yeah, it's something to look into, and I think if we look at the model of scaling down, and we 10 just was a number we came up with, right? But I think if we could re-examine that before we come up, and I think some of our public speakers may address that as well. But the real question I was getting at is that to our city clerk, is that you use the word exorbitant costs if we go citywide.
Because
Now,
of the cost of the entire voting system apparatus, the machine, the systemized process.
but if our goal is to do special elections as a pilot, and we say, "Wow, this is great! Voter participation rates in these areas skyrocketed. We love it." I mean, it's not exorbitant to move in that direction eventually, right? We just have to scale up to it.
Right now, we don't need any equipment to do a single district election because
I see.
it's
All consistent.
it's the number of ballot types.
I see.
In a
Okay.
single district election, there's only one ballot type.
Okay, but my question is, if we ever go citywide,
We would need multiple ballot types.
but
It
would
all-
the cost be exorbitant?
it would
With,
depend
with,
on
I think the
system you
answer is with the
buy.
current equipment, it would definitely be more expensive because I think unless we design something saying you could only go to voting centers in your own district.
Yeah.
I think as the city clerk has responded, which it doesn't have to be, but the city clerk has responded under, you can go to any drop-off center anywhere in the city. If that's the case, and we want people who maybe don't have their ballot to drop off, but need to say, okay, I need a CD13 ballot, even though I'm here in CD5 and, going off to CD11 later, they would have to have all of them. But it would, I mean, you could save money probably by saying, look, if you're in CD14, you have to go to one of these 10 centers or 30 centers in CD14, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be
Right.
as expensive.
But so my question remains: can we ever go citywide in the future? But you're saying
If
it'll
we
cost
buy
us
additional
money
equipment.
if we
See,
buy
the
additional
thing about
equipment.
a single district election is there's only one ballot type.
Yeah.
Even in a specific council district, on a citywide, or even, say, the 2011, with 7 seats up,
Good. Yeah.
there are still going to be a significant number of ballot types.
Good.
And the only time this works right now is if there's a single ballot type.
And on that, I think where it gets more complicated is it isn't just everybody in CD15 go to a CD15 one. You might have a line cutting through that for an assembly, well, not assembly, for a community college or school board district, which
yeah.
is at the same time as our city elections.
So bottom line is, we could do this special, and if we see that the benefits of having increased voter participation, we will want to invest in new equipment to do citywide. Yeah.
Well, I think from our discussions in this committee, I hope we're looking at, investing in new voter equipment, no matter what, whether it's looking at ranked voting, whether it's looking at this, I mean, or whether it's just looking at ease for our city clerk. We do a good job with what we have, but our technology is a couple decades behind where technology for other sorts of things we do in life are. Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. Should we take, did you want to add something from before, and then we'll take some public comment? Unless there's
Yeah, just a couple of quick
questions right now.
points because of the issues that were raised. In terms of the minimum number of vote centers, it is true that there should be a minimum number of vote centers, and that's something we advised in that there is potential infringement or argument of infringement on someone's right to vote if they don't
Yeah.
vote by mail or don't like to vote by mail. And
Right.
therefore, having this as an alternative, and I think that's what the proposal is an alternative, a voting center with all vote by mail alleviates those concerns. There are cases out there that have upheld all vote by mail voting. In fact, we have that in some assessment district elections and other types of elections. So
Right.
that has been upheld, although, in a city like Los Angeles where there is a great deal of diversity and there's a lot of other concerns, in a single district, I think there should be, and we've advised that there should be a minimum number of voting centers that are there. The more voting centers that are located in the district, the legal concern, of course, would go down.
Were there challenges on that in Oregon? Were there
Um,
legal challenges to that based on that same principle in Oregon, do you know?
In Oregon, it was upheld generally. I don't think that the challenges were based on whether there were actually voting centers there. I could look into that and get back to you on that. But there have been challenges in this state on all vote by mail voting in the assessment district context. The other element of it is that there should be outreach and the voting center should be strategically located to make sure that communities and neighborhoods that don't traditionally vote by mail will have greater access to these vote centers. Finally, I wanted to note that we're talking here about starting as a pilot project for a single district election and perhaps seeing how that goes for an all citywide. We would need, for drafting purposes, clear direction on what triggers the move from a single district to a citywide. Would it be a clerk recommendation followed by a council ordinance declaring that this now is something we want to implement citywide? Because when it implement it citywide, then it impacts our primary and general runoff elections, which is a greater impact on our city election system. In a single district election, when there's a vacancy, we have an ordinance that the council passes to call the election, and in that ordinance, it could be called as a vote by mail election. We could design it that way, but we would need some ideas of what would be the trigger for a citywide implementation of this, if that's contemplated in this measure. It could be that something that you want to come back to the voters on later on. That's something that was raised earlier as well.
Okay.
I say if Jose Wesar's on the ballot citywide, that triggers citywide vote by mail.
That triggers it right there.
It's his idea.
We have 2 public speaker cards on item 2. Kathy Fung is our first speaker, and Dr. Clyde Williams, if they come forward as well.
I just wanted to speak in support of the report that's been issued, and also to
Your name for the record?
Oh, Kathy Fung with California Common Cause, sorry. I think that we will eventually talk about the later agenda item, which proposes something that specifically would implement what the city clerk is talking about. And I think what we're chiefly talking about is creating language in the charter that would authorize the implementation of neighborhood vote centers with all vote by mail. I think the key thing to think about, and you asked a good question, which is why is this far more popular? Why is vote by mail an option that more voters up north choose than certainly in Los Angeles County? In fact, if you look statewide, our county is fairly at the bottom of participation rates. I mean, I think that what you have to think about is kind of how it is that you currently opt for vote by mail. When you're filling out the registration form, you have to check off a box, or when you receive your sample ballot, you have to actually proactively return the request for a vote by mail ballot, then it gets mailed back to you. And the nice thing about this proposal is that it's automatic. We save money because we're mailing to people the sample ballot anyways, but along with that, then you include the vote by mail ballot, which I think part of the hurdle has always been the extra step that it takes to request a vote by mail ballot. We've seen some polling, and I think some of our allies will bring that forward later on in subsequent hearings, that show that if people were to receive vote by mail ballots directly in the mail in Los Angeles, the response rate would be quite high. Common Cause has looked at some other jurisdictions that have implemented the vote center concept alongside with vote by mail. And in particular, I think Denver is a good example of a fairly large metropolitan jurisdiction. It doesn't have the diversity that we do or the languages that we do, but what we did was we looked at the precincts.
Can you finish it?
We looked at the precincts that were heavily Latino and heavily African American, and what we found was that not only did the general population's participation rate go up, but in those precincts, the rate of increase was even greater than the general population. So it was a nice message to say that everybody does participate in vote by mail if given sort of the automatic opportunity to, and it helps with those communities that are most likely to be disenfranchised. Speaking about just the choice of where the voting centers should be, I think that it's important that we have an open process to figure out what the right number is and also where they should be located, because each district is going to be different. Where people consider to be friendly, convenient, accessible locations is different. I will say that in my experience in poll monitoring elections in the past, I have poll monitored particularly in immigrant communities where there are a high number of Asian American non-English speaker voters. And we cite a lot of polling locations in very shocking locations. People's living rooms, very dark, inaccessible locations. And I think part of it is that because we have this idea that a polling place should be super close to any one voter, sometimes we're not as choosy about those locations because we can't be. I think if we went to a smaller number, what we could do is move more of those locations into public, accessible, easy to find parking on transit routes, locations like libraries, community centers, schools, for instance, that I think that generally speaking the public would recognize as being truly public. I think particularly in minority communities, we've seen some locations be cited in, for instance, sheriff's department offices, and the community has complained about that being intimidating for a variety of reasons. So if we can be choosier And that also means choosier about who our poll workers are. If you have a fewer number of voting centers, you can actually then deploy city employees who are well-trained and ready to handle the variety of questions that voters ask on Election Day. And you're not worried about the potential for messing up what the rules are or turning somebody away, because the city employees are going to be ready for that. Lastly, I would just say that I think that with the neighborhood vote center idea, we've seen this implemented in a number of different jurisdictions. So we mentioned Denver, but also Burbank. Santa Barbara just recently went to vote by mail voting. So there's quite a few jurisdictions around the state that we can look to for some lessons learned on this. And if we implement this with some good community input on where those neighborhood voting centers should be sited, I think we'll be all right. I think just one last thing.
And if I can ask you to include,
Yes.
the precedent that we established is going to be
sorry.
for everybody else. So.
There was a question asked about why 10, and I think that Frank Martinez had originally been thinking about creating a rule that no poll site should be farther than 1 mile from any resident. And I think that in his analysis, he had this, by using that geographic measure, he was able to come up with a certain number of poll sites. Now, we need to go back and figure out what that is. But I think another way to think about this is not to pick a certain number per district, but to think rather along those lines. If any district had a poll site that was no further than X amount of miles from a voter, that was on a transit route, accessible and all that, how many would we have?
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Dr. Williams?
Dr. Clyde Williams.
Just to make the rules clear for this one, I'll let you go. We are more casual in the committee environment, but folks can keep themselves to under 4 minutes, please. And
Me?
No, just in general. We have 16 more comment opportunities coming before us. So if we do it at 2 minutes, that's a half hour. If we do it at 4 minutes, that's an hour of testimony, et cetera. So please, go ahead.
I'll be brief.
No worries.
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno, Northeast LA, LA 32 Neighborhood Council representative. We've had an election by the city clerk in neighborhood councils. Those aren't citywide. Would you also include in this ordinance, or charter and ordinance, including neighborhood councils? Because what we experienced with the city clerk was pretty abysmal during the neighborhood councils.
To be clear, our city clerk does run our non-neighborhood council elections. We're not suggesting
They operated the elections for LA 32 this
No,
last
I know.
year.
But in case you're saying that they do have experience, they have experience also.
They
with
have experience,
the
but
election.
for the neighborhood councils, it was a bad experience.
Understood.
And for several other neighborhood councils, it was a bad experience. So there was a lot of issues that arose from that. However, one of the things would be, I strongly support any mail-in system. And I would also support, rather than snail mail, email. So we do a lot of work right now by email. We do a lot of legal actions right now by email. Voting by email. We just did a vote on elevation of Southwest Museum to a grant status. We failed. However, it was all handled by email, voting for the various sites. So I'd highly recommend that you go over to email. This is the 21st century, and stop supporting the U.S. Postal Service quite so much, and perhaps streamline it so that it can be done much more efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you. We can have city staff come back. That is, those are only comment cards on number 2. So we have before us the report and a couple ways we could move forward. One could be obviously citywide. One could be specific for special elections. But if we move forward with special elections, it's with what, design and how many centers, et cetera. Do you have a sense of what your breaking point would be of cost equality? How many voting centers if you did it just for single districts?
We would have to report back.
Yeah, but no kind of anecdotal.
I think how we computed it was 10 neighborhood voting centers would be about $10,000 So
And doing 170 or however many
then you just
district
do the
is how many?
multiplication.
No, without doing them as voting centers, but traditional precinct operations are about how much? Like, what do we spend
I
in
need Arlene
CD2?
to answer that.
I'd be more comfortable reporting back. I mean, we could get it back to you fairly quickly, but.
Because, I mean, if it's 10,000 per, let's say we did 30, now we're at 300,000. I assume the bulk of you said it was less than, the 2 million that was allocated for the CD2 election, it was less, it was about half that you spent. So $1 million, I assume the great bulk was for those voting centers. Is that?
For precinct.
For the precinct operation. So that's still less than, $1 million, or let's say it was 700,000 or 800,000 for the precinct centers themselves. That would be still less. So we could do more than 10 and still be comfortably less than if you wanted to move for more.
I mean, there was, what I heard was the proposal is to have these neighborhood voting centers staffed by city employees.
That is correct.
So we're prepared to do that. They become the poll workers?
Yes.
So city employees become the poll workers?
Well, many of our poll workers, not all, but many of them are as needed poll workers that we hire on election day. Some are city employees that contribute, and some are volunteers.
What's the mix right now between volunteers and paid city employees?
Arlene, you want to just stay up here? Might be easier for you to come up. We'll have a ton of questions for you.
Hello, Arlene Taylor, Chief of the Election Division. Your question was how many city employees versus community volunteers?
Staffing our polling places.
Our goal in the past has been to have one city employee at every polling place, but we've never met that goal. So
The majority is volunteers?
Yes.
And why haven't we met that goal?
It's hard, because the way the city employee poll worker program is structured is that the department has to release that employee for the day.
So if we've had a hard time meeting even one, what makes us think we're going to fully staff these neighborhood centers?
Special elections, we don't have that many people.
With city employees?
Does it say, no, we would hire as needed staff to staff these sites, not
So it'd be more like poll workers the way they are now.
Exactly, but they would be
I was
more
confused
like
on
our
that.
as needed.
I was confused with that because it sounded like it would be staffed by city employees. That's what I heard.
They'd be staffed by employees that we would hire and train and have at the polling place, but not by the community volunteers as the polling places are currently. But they would not be they would not be existing city employees. They would be temporary staff that we would hire for this purpose.
Which is what we do anyway for any municipal election. Our permanent election staff is very small, about 25 people, but come election day, we hire up to as many as 800 people.
Well, we have 300 people for the 9 months preceding
What would be the purpose of that and doing away with volunteers?
Because you could not depend when you hire people as needed, you contract with them to show up to do a job, as opposed to opening up for volunteers. You do not know what you're going to end up with. You could take the risk of ending up with a polling place that isn't manned that day. So we have to always make sure that we have adequate city representation. And then on election day, we kind of shuffle it around if not enough volunteers show up.
Currently, right now, how do we do a city election?
Arlene?
In terms of staffing at the polling place, we have the community volunteers.
Right.
And in addition, we have the city employee poll workers. And we also have
So obviously, I guess my point is, obviously, that's worked for us so far. Why are we worried about these neighborhood centers not? Seems like June said, well, you don't know what you're going to get. It may not be staffed.
No. I was saying if you go wholly with volunteer workers, that's what I was addressing. When you said, why can't we just depend totally on a volunteer?
No, I didn't understand why we're making. Here's my problem. We're making a lot of changes in this proposal. There's a lot of changes that you're asking voters to sort of absorb. And I'm thinking even something as simple as there's a lot of people out there that really, look forward to working in the polls. I mean, there's some regular, and it just felt like when I listened to the previous statement that it was going to be they were all going to be staffed by city employees. I didn't understand that.
I don't know if I said it, but if I did, I misspoke. It would follow the same model.
Okay.
Our goal has always been to have, as
Okay.
Arlene stated, a city employee at
So
every
that's all the
poll.
same?
It's,
Okay, that did not come across. You guys are all looking really confused on this aspect, but.
And I think
I'm
the
glad that's
important, the important piece is here that we wanted, the main change is that to allow everyone to have a vote by mail card at their home. From that, the implementation piece, we need to look at, and there are some pieces we could clarify between now
Right.
and the time the ordinance comes back.
Right.
And other pieces that, it's part of management that they're gonna have to figure out, and we need to ask them,
Right.
how they're gonna do it. So,
Right.
right now, I think, we focus on the main piece and ask the questions we need to ask, but we have some time before the ordinance comes back that, for those things that need to be in the ordinance, and the implementation piece or other pieces, we need
I
to
agree,
know
yeah.
the costs, et
Yeah,
cetera. But
yeah, there's a lot, I have still a lot of questions about this. I'm willing to move this out of committee and take it to the full city council, but I have a lot of still questions that I hope we're gonna get back some answers
Why
on
don't we-
exactly how we're gonna implement this the first time.
okay, and I want to make sure that we address those questions. So the ones I have right now are the number of polling, addressing fully the number of polling centers per the district.
Right.
And also the cost breakdowns. Is there any other, do we have an answer?
One of the things I wanted was to hear back on the voting record of the permanent
Right,
vote by
they're
mail.
turnbacks over a period of time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I will move then is that we move to instruct the city attorney to draft something for special elections
For special-
that would, and that we.
Non-citywide special elections.
Correct. Yeah, non-citywide special, single district special
Okay.
elections. And that, the city clerk work with the CLA and the city attorney on the recommending mechanism for that, what triggers it. I personally would like to give some direction that I think it should come from the city clerk and not from elected officials who have stakes sometimes in elections. So, but we need to develop clear criteria.
And
But
are we proposing this for the March ballot?
it's a draft to be ready for the March ballot, but in the meantime, I think this
What's the turnout
information.
projection for this next March election?
Oh, but no, it wouldn't be in place for March ballot. The proposal would be not the voting mechanism.
No, I'm asking,
Yeah.
it will be on the March ballot, though.
Correct.
I'm asking what the voter turnout for the March ballot is.
City clerk doesn't project.
Okay, very low.
I think it's going to
I
be at
mean,
least,
I guess-
it's going to be at least 12%.
I guess the irony for me is we're actually putting on a very low turnout ballot this proposal to actually try to increase voter participation. So we're kind of allowing,
Got to start somewhere.
yeah, I know, it's ironic to me.
Yeah, but you could
Irony do leave it
increase
as-
voter turnout by the measures that may be placed on the March ballot, because if it generates a lot of interest, you'll get voters out there.
Let's put something controversial.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're gonna have a lot. Look, we're gonna have a lot of things on there. It looks like there's gonna be ratepayer advocate for DWP. There's gonna be some
That's
things on
that'll be-
ethics
that'll be
potentially, some
another
things on
thing.
planning potentially.
Right.
So,
And the other piece we wanted to work on was the trigger if we go citywide, but we would have to have those discussions, and I mean, we're not going to resolve it here, but we have to figure that out before, if it hits the floor with an ordinance.
But basically, what we're proposing is it's a vote by mail with the option of still walking in and voting.
Correct.
So it's not really a complete vote by mail.
well, it makes sure that everybody
Hybrid.
does have something in
Hybrid.
their mailbox, which I think is an added
Yeah.
step of potential
Right.
higher voter turnout, which to me is a positive thing. Instead of actually sending forward the drafting
Right.
the ordinance, why don't we have the city attorney report back with the steps, including details of election code and charter changes necessary that would be required to implement VBM elections for a non-citywide special election, where there's a number of other items that are coming back in 2 weeks too, so that we can get these moving. But I think those questions can be answered before, if you start doing the drafting of the ordinance, and then we say change it, it's going to be a lot of lost hours. But
Can I ask
I want to give that forward momentum.
So currently, right now, we have the ability to mail, I mean, part of this was to take out the middleman of having the requesting it. We have the capacity right now to just mail absentee ballots.
If you request it.
No, without requesting.
In other words, we
Can
keep
we
the
do
rest
that?
of the system,
Can we-
but every
can
single
we-
person would get an absentee ballot too?
Can we do that now?
Can we physically do it, or can we legally do it?
Can we both?
Both.
Hasn't the difficulty been that if you
I'm
do
not-
that, somebody could send that in and show up? And then you
Well,
have to
that's
disentangle
going to be the case of this.
Physically, we
This,
can
we're still giving
physically in
people
a
the option
single
of walking
district
in.
election, if we had the legal ability tomorrow to do a single district vote by mail district, we could physically do it. I don't know if we have the legal ability to do it, but we could physically do it. But that's only in a single district.
You're asking, well, can't we just do it anyway?
Right.
I've heard from the, I don't know. city
Why
council
can't we,
chime in, but
I mean, why can't we see if this is really the answer to to increasing voter participation by mail? Is if people actually have the ballot in their hand, which I think is a good idea anyway. I mean, it's part of me thinks we should be doing that anyway.
The need for a charter amendment is driven by the reduction of polling places, the departure from a polling place-based system to a vote-by-mail-based system. That is the reason. Our whole election scheme in our charter is based on a
So
polling
we could
place.
keep the number of polling places and mail people their absentee ballot.
We could look into that, but if you're saying in sort of creating all vote by mail as well as a full polling place election system, the question of why we can't mail ballots or vote by mail ballots to all voters as a matter of course, we can look into. I don't know of any legal prohibition of doing that. There's an administrative issue of when people come to vote at the polling place. If they're a vote by mail voter, it says so on the roster, and therefore they either have to turn in their unvoted vote by mail ballot or not be able to vote other than provisionally. So we could look into that.
It will cost more.
But again, I would just like to know what prevents us from doing that right now.
It's probably cost.
Okay, well, I'd like to see that. I think we should do that anyway. I mean, this is about, as you said, you think the main reason people are not voting by mail is because it's that extra step it takes to request the ballot.
That's what Common Cause thinks, yes.
Right.
I think
well, we believe Common Cause.
Okay, we believe
they're right.
I just wanted to make
No, I know, but I mean, no, I'm saying, I think there's some validity to that. I think there's some validity to that. Anyway, I'd like to find out.
How much more? Why don't we find out how much more that would cost as well? And when we had that discussion before, that was something I had suggested 2 years ago, I think, in committee. And I thought maybe it's not a legal prohibition, but there is I'd like to know, as you answer that, whether you have the administrative ability to then, without it, and maybe we decide to do it delaying the election a week or 2 weeks to figure out, you have to cross-check then who showed up and who sent in, if every single person.
I think you have to consider if.
Well, tell me how that's different.
Hold on, let me just hear the answer.
That's different from what we're proposing.
No, it is the same. That's what I'm saying. When we get the answers to that, I wanted the answer to that question too. But what were you about to say?
I think what is going on here is, I believe, and we will check on this, that we would have the capacity to mail everyone a vote by mail, but that would preclude the use of voting centers because that's where
You wouldn't do voting centers. It's just all precincts and everybody gets a ballot, as Ms. Hahn suggested, as we've discussed. It's whether or not then back at the the counting. It's whether you have the administrative.
Yeah, what do we do with them once we get them is the question.
So it's not just a cost of how much more for the mailing. It's do we have the capacity and how much more cost back at the home office.
Got it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's get to the next item. Thank you. We'll now turn to item number
What do we do? You just ask for a
3. I think what we're going to be winding up doing with 6 is probably, since that's the final instruction, we'll hold that together with 6 today. So let's do 2 and 3. We'll just do those 2 and see what we need to instruct the city attorney to keep that forward motion on that. So we'll get that back. Number 3, please.
Holly Walcott with the Office of the City Clerk. In October of 2008, the City Council directed the City Clerk to put together a ranked choice voting working group, which we did, and we met regularly for about a year. It took a while to put out the report due to both.
I'm sorry, Holly. Let me stop you for a sec. For folks that have put in cards for 6, I assume that might have meant that you wanted to talk on the provisions of 2 as well. Is there anybody who just has a 6 card in who wanted to give their comments on the mail part of it? Okay. All right. And we're happy to hear as it's ongoing. Okay. Thanks. Sorry, Holly. Go ahead.
No problem. So the ranked choice voting group was members were the Office of the City Clerk, City Attorney, CAO, CLA, City Ethics Commission, Los Angeles Unified School District, LACCD, LA County Registrar Recorder, and experts from the community and the academic community. the report is quite lengthy. It was released in April 8th of 2010. I'm just going to summarize what our findings were, and I'll then open for questions. But bottom line is, if we're going to go to RCV, or ranked choice voting, we would need to have a system that could handle the tally. And currently, we do not have the equipment that can handle ranked choice voting. There is no unconditionally certified system in the state of California that exists, and we do believe that that would be a primary criteria is to have certified equipment. The equipment being used in San Francisco right now is conditionally certified. There is one vendor currently that makes Sequoia, and there is a second company that hopes to have a system by January. But again, before we moved in that direction, city clerk wouldn't want to go in that direction until there is a system that we could use.
Wasn't there an academic consortium too that was going to look at that here? That I'm imagining that like
Caltech and the County of Los Angeles are working together to build a new voting system, and we are working closely with them. Okay. We feel that in order to minimize cost and to make the voting experience similar for both city and county residents, because most of the time it needs to be similar, that we should have the same voting system as the county. And we currently do. We have a different tally system, but that's on the back administrative side. It's a similar equipment. But the voting experience for all the voters, as we use the same ballot machines, the IngaVote is the same. So our recommendation as we move forward is to definitely work with the county to obtain new voting equipment. We need new voting equipment anyway, and we can certainly make the ranked choice voting equipment portion of that a priority. But my concern with going in that direction would be making sure that we have equipment. I mean, there's people on both sides. There are those that are strong advocates for ranked choice voting, and there are those that have their concerns. I can briefly go through those if you'd like me to. But bottom line, we need the equipment. We need a charter change to implement, and finally, in order to make an effective change to ranked choice voting, we would need to do an extensive outreach campaign.
So there would be some initial one-time cost to get people used to the new style of voting.
Thank you for reiterating that from our earlier discussion of this. Questions or comments from us first before we go to public comments?
Thank you. Again, this item has been around for some time, and Council President Garcetti and I think we had pushed a motion to create the task force in 2007. And in my opinion, after listening to the forums that we had on improving elections in the city, is that it would be great to have direction from the council and the voters that get some direction whether or not we want to go in that direction or not. We're going to buy equipment in the future. So the clerk needs to know if there's this discussion out there. Should we, shouldn't we? Should we make it compatible with ranked choice voting? Shouldn't we? I think if we put it out on the ballot, let the voters decide, the clerk will have their direction as to whether we should do it or not, and they should make their equipment compatible or ready for it or not. There's a movement out there to, make ranked choice voting the election choice of the city of LA. I believe in it. What would happen if you go out buy the equipment and then that push comes again and people want to see that type of voting? I mean, you would have to make some adjustments, et cetera. In discussion with the clerk, we recognize that if the voters were to say yes in the March 2011 ballot for this, that perhaps 2015, is that correct, is the first date we would probably see it?
See, that's what my concern is. My concern is not with going to ranked choice voting. I have no objection to going with ranked choice voting. I think I speak for the entire clerk's office. Mm-hmm. My concern would be that about putting a date on something that we don't know We don't know the financial condition of the city. We're talking about a $40 million expenditure to buy a new voting system. Of course, if we buy a voting system or develop a voting system with the county, it's half that. And the ranked choice voting component of that is not as significant. It's maybe 1 or 2% of the total cost. So certainly, as far as the equipment is concerned, it's doable, but I don't know when voting equipment is going to be certified. And we have to do an extensive outreach campaign. Generally, voters, such as voters in San Francisco, understood how it worked with our outreach campaign. Some of the questions more came on how are the votes tabulated, as opposed to what do I need to do at the polls. So we need to make sure that the public has to trust the voting system. So would I commit to 2015? Absolutely not.
You wouldn't commit to 2015, but we don't necessarily have to commit to a date, but we could commit to conditions, correct?
Absolutely.
Like if this happens.
Absolutely.
And this happens, we will do it. Right?
Absolutely.
So if the voters say, we want this because we do believe it'll save the city money, it'll increase voter participation because of fatigue, voter fatigue would no longer exist, we want it, and then there's conditions so long as there is new voter equipment that the clerk has purchased, and so long as the clerk has an implementation plan and there has been an education component, we will move forward.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Kathy, why don't you come forward? David Holtzman and Trent Lang. The power trio.
I'll just make one quick comment. We do support.
Don't worry, I didn't mean to scare you away from talking. I let you go, so don't worry.
We do support the city moving to a place where we authorize the potential implementation of ranked choice voting through a charter change. I just talked to the LA County Registrar Recorder and County Clerk yesterday about what the progress was for their own development of a new voting system. And so again, they have been working with a number of researchers. They've engaged in a pretty broad community process to take input from a number of stakeholders. And their idea is to develop a voting system, meaning the equipment that you vote on and all the way through to the thing that's counting the ballots in-house. And the idea is to address the concerns that have come up about outside vendors playing games with the outcome and or the lack of security or lack of other types of accessibility features in those equipment. The LA County hope is that they will develop a set of protocol by early next year, 2011, and to actually have a system online by 2013 and fully rolled out by 2014 for the statewide elections. Mm-hmm. So their test run will be in 2013 during the city elections that they manage in November primarily. So I think that we can have an internal goal, or we can state it as Councilmember Wesar has said with a set of conditions. But I think certainly we're now moving to a place where we will have a system. What the county has said is if the city, because we share staff and technologies and all these other things, if the city is thinking about wanting to move to a place where we would like to have RCV compatible machines, that we should tell them sooner than later so that as they're developing the equipment that they have that signal and they will create equipment that can be compatible with RCV if necessary.
Thanks, Kathy. David.
David Holtzman, President, League of Women Voters of Los Angeles. The League of Women Voters of Los Angeles and the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles County both support ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting, and advocate it as the best feasible way to conduct single winner elections. Now we're just talking about the city clerk's report. In that context, I want to start by thanking Councilmember Garcetti, Mr. Chair. Going through my records recently, I found a letter that you wrote to me 5 years and 2 days ago. And it says, as you know, I am a strong supporter of instant runoff elections, and I look forward to working with you to make it a reality in Los Angeles.
5 years later.
5 years later, we're still getting reports and such.
A different man.
On behalf of the league and on behalf of the voters of LA, I do want to thank the city clerk's office for the work they put into preparing the report that's before you today. They did what they could with the limited resources and authority they had. I don't really think you can see it's not entirely complete. But really, it's time now to put a pin in that, close this particular council file, and move on to letting the voters decide whether they'd like to have what's now called ranked choice voting for their city elections. Now, no longer as a league person, as someone who's had experience as a civil servant, worked in state government, actually ran a committee that was a joint effort between public experts and different departments in the state. Councilmember Hahn, you have to leave? This is we're getting to the good part.
I know. I'm supposed to be in Wilmington at 4:30.
I'm sorry you have to go.
Can we move item number 6 forward?
Okay, is there anything more we can do before you go? Because we'd love to have the committee move this out of committee and get it going. And I don't want to sit here and waste time. If you got to get, I wish the city council had fixed the traffic problem already, and you wouldn't have to worry about being late. But that's too much to hope for. We all know, and it's not the city council.
Public comment and take a vote. You had me at hello.
On item 6, I mean, this is where it might contradict what we've been talking about doing. I mean, if there's certain questions that need to be answered, and then we have the full package move forward without the package cooked. I mean, I want to anticipate this as an ally and a proponent of some of of the 3 things that are before us. But I can anticipate some people saying, "Bring it to us when it's done," as opposed to rushing a yes vote on 6. But Mr. Wesar, I'd be curious to hear your opinion.
I mean, if we could get it to council, in many of these cases where we are putting things before the voters, we have time between the time that the council approves something and it comes back to us from the city attorney's ordinance and charter language. So there's still time to cook this. And a lot of this, what I see, is really implementation pieces. I mean, I think if we should decide whether we agree with this or not, that's one thing. But a lot of the questions we have now are implementation questions, which I think could be resolved later on. So I would like to see this moved forward to council, and we've discussed all of these, except the one we haven't really discussed is removing the cap from the matching grant program. And so I'll leave it up to your discretion, but
I say this in a way that is in no way, again, I want to be very clear about this holding back or trying to delay and say, oh, we missed the deadline. I think we got to do this right and not necessarily do it fast. There's some legitimate questions that are the final ones. As much as it's nice to put the pin in it today, I wouldn't want to rush that. The excuse of, look, we brought instant runoff voting when it was IRV to council. Some of us voted for it, and I looked forward to that in that letter, as I said, and it didn't go forward. And I suggested strategically at the time to some friends and allies that maybe it wasn't the best time to bring it forward, but people wanted that, and they got that vote. I'm glad that on principle, people got to express their principles. I'm less interested in principle than real change. And as such, I think we have a good go this round. We have, regrouped and rethought about the strategy for it. Today, I think, would be a little premature, but we have Cecilia and my staff is working very hard, and we have 2 weeks another meeting. And there's other items, by the way, for the March ballot that will be before us then, too. And like one of them is mine, and I have no interest in not seeing that be on the ballot. So none of this is delayed to put it.
As long as we don't miss any deadlines for getting something on the March ballot.
Sorry, it's October 20th. My apologies.
Yeah.
So we have until October 20th.
No, October 20th is our next one. We have till November 3rd to begin the instructions. Technically, we have a little bit of wiggle room there, but November 3rd is when we should be asking the city attorney to formally draft any of the items that are before us.
That's the deadline for the full council, but how about for this committee to move it forward?
The 3rd is what day of the week? We know, November 3rd?
I believe it's a Wednesday.
Wednesday, so yeah. So it'd probably be the week before if we did.
Okay, so there's time.
Yeah, there's plenty of time.
Best of luck to you with your traffic problem today.
Yeah, you moved the previous item, which was a piece of number 6. So I'm just wondering.
Right, I requested the city attorney come back to here with the steps necessary.
Come back here?
Yeah.
Not to council?
Necessary.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I didn't hear that.
For the steps necessary to do that, to make sure that Ms. Hahn's questions, otherwise it would move forward, I think, with no recommendation out of committee. And it's probably stronger to get those questions answered, see if we can get a majority out of committee if folks are inclined to vote that way, and then move it to full council. So why don't we excuse Ms. Hahn?
Well, what are you going to do?
Don't worry, go, no, not, I wouldn't. I think we'd be asking for any questions to be answered, be brought back here on those. And six would be held, I mean, 6 is contingent on those answers on 2 and 3 and the actual drafting of. 6 is the final, send it to council to put on. And I think we need to know what it is that we're gonna be putting on.
So you're confident that if it comes back here with some of these questions answered on the 20th, then we can move it forward to
Oh, absolutely,
council
absolutely.
at that point.
That's my intention for.
Okay, because I am committed to moving these forward to the full city council. I think that's important.
Thank you, Councilmember Hahn. I'm
Absolutely.
very pleased to hear that.
Absolutely.
So this will come back October 20th to committee?
Yes.
And then we have until November 3rd.
Okay.
Yes, for the council to adopt, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the city attorney has to have it back to the council by the 19th, I believe.
Okay. All right.
It's 2 weeks.
All right.
So,
But you have my
so the
commitment
17th,
to move
17th.
forward.
Or the,
We appreciate that.
I think I saw the 19th.
Hurrah.
Dropped it.
Go, Janice.
So sorry.
Oh.
This session's taped, right? And what Janice
Yes.
said?
Sausage making it its best. Were you done?
No, actually, I wasn't done, but, you know, I saw her getting up to leave, and I had to make
Please.
sure
Continue.
we could address, just briefly, let's close the study phase and start moving it forward, is what I was saying. But again, I was going to offer some personal remarks from me as advice to the council members in the future.
Just had it one more minute. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I've managed these types of efforts at the state level. First of all, next time you ask for city clerk's office to do something that's going to take a lot of work, it would be nice if you gave them some money to do it. You know, it's sort of like an unfunded mandate for them, and they really had to pull a big project together. They were supposed to bring academic experts in from the outside world. Well, you know, most consultants don't work without payment, so they were only able to get one. The other thing is you might actually consider, instead of asking a joint effort like that to report back to council, ask the joint effort to report to the public, and then it's an executive branch effort, and it doesn't pull in the Brown Act. You can, and so they could work together, have quick conference calls or whatever to see who's got data that could fill in the gaps in the report. There's a huge gap in the existing report about fiscal impact because the city administrative officer's office never came through with that piece of it. So just consider having it to let so that the agencies can all work together more efficiently, have it not say it as report back to the council, but report to the public, and then they wouldn't have to do all the Brown Act every time they talked about this thing. It would be, you know, just structurally, it's a suggestion I have for future reports this way to make it easier for the administrative agencies to work.
Can we mark this as the first time a good government advocate said, please bypass the.
No, I'm saying you should have a few public hearings.
I just wanted to celebrate
But
it. So don't worry.
yeah, okay, yeah, I'm serious. You know, I worked in administrative agencies, and you know, you don't want to be hamstrung by that.
Sure.
And it would make it much easier. In fact, I thought that's what was going to happen. They were going to get public comment and go back and work on it and come back with a report and present it to the public for comment. But instead, they had to have a Brown Act meeting every time they worked on it. It's just inefficient. That's it for this piece.
Okay,
Put a
super.
pin in it.
We'll have
Thank
you back shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trent.
Hi, Trent Lang, President of the California Clean Money Campaign. Of course, the California Clean Money Campaign is focused on public financing of campaigns, but for all the reasons that they've discussed, we believe that ranked choice voting is good policy. But also, one of the nice side effects is when you eliminate the runoff election, it will save significant funds for the public financing system, allowing, if we make these other charter changes in item 6, us to make the current public financing system more robust. And we would also argue that eventually there will be savings down the road in terms of the city clerk administering elections, that those savings after the education process is done could be specified to go into the public financing fund and therefore strengthen it and increase the voters' ability to get more candidates and more confidence in their electoral system. So for those reasons, we support the ranked choice voting.
We could take a small piece to do the studies, too.
Yes.
If we have
There you
money
go.
to save.
Absolutely.
Everybody would be happy. Thank you, Trent.
Thank you.
Daniela Escobar.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Doing well, thank
Good.
you. Thank you for having me.
Sure.
My name is Daniela Escobar, and I'm here representing Antonio Gonzalez, president of Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, who couldn't be here due to a prior engagement. I have here his statement to read in front of you. SVREP supports Council Member Wesar's reform package. SVREP has supported similar such proposals for many years, including instant runoff voting, weekend voting, election day holidays, public financing of candidates, and so on. In particular, SVREP believes that instant runoff voting, or IRV, offers the City of Los Angeles precious cost savings during the time of great budgetary stress. Moreover, SVREP believes IRV will have the salutary effect of reducing negative campaigning, in which a candidate is given incentives not to denounce their opponents since they want to be designated by their opponent's supporters as their second choice. Finally, IRV tends to increase participation since more voters tend to vote on the first round of elections in the second runoffs than in the traditional runoffs. From a Latino perspective, we consider this reform package prudent and timely. Thank you, Antonio Gonzalez, SVREP President.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
If you want to submit that to the clerk too, we can put that in the record.
Yes.
Thank you. Joe, Data, come on forward. Joe, you're up, Joe. Come on forward. You can't believe it, can you? After Joe will be Robin Gilbert.
Oh, whoa. Sure. Here you go.
Hello.
Hello.
To see you.
It's nice to see you.
How are you?
Well, you don't go far enough, but it's such a great step in the right direction. I wish I had flowers to give to all of you who work on this. And
We couldn't accept them as a public gift anyway, but I consider the intention executed. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've had some disappointments at the California Clean Money Campaign. Even with the poll numbers so great, we didn't win this time, but we're not stopping. And this is a step in the right direction. So I just love to congratulate you and urge you to get it done in a hurry.
Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate it. Robin.
Yes, Robin Gilbert, and I'm the coordinator of volunteers for the California Clean Money Campaign in the San Fernando Valley. Our volunteers work with the neighborhood councils, we work with other community groups and church groups, and at community events to outreach, to educate the public on public funding of campaigns, and to get their feedback and their ideas and their recommendations. The vast majority of the people we talk to, they like the idea of public funding of campaigns, and I am urging you to lift the cap on our current fund system of matching public funds for campaigns. The voters understand it would increase the pool of candidates because many candidates now just can't afford to run. It would also allow the candidates to speak to the voters, to go out and meet with them, with the small groups, the PTAs, the church groups, rather than having to raise funds and spend time doing that. So again, I urge you to, as part of this package, to lift the cap on the matching funds trust fund.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And Wayne Williams.
Council members.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
It's a little different.
A little more casual than the last time. Huh?
Yeah.
I really want to emphasize another point that I think is invaluable. I'm Wayne Williams, first of all. I'm representing the California Clean Money Action Fund and the Democratic Club in the Valley, Valley Democrats United. Voter-owned elections is a cultural term that I think defines in the public's mind that this is something they own. This is not something that gets conducted outside of their environment. And it encompasses both their funding of that process, just like their funding of roads, just like their funding of their government, and it brings it back home. And the other aspect of voter-owned elections is the integrity that goes into that process. And I think for the most part, people in our country right now have been indoctrinated with the sort of the context that elections are not working right, that they somehow can be manipulated. And the fact that we have voting systems that are electronic now, that go, that operate with less valuable auditable tracking than even your bank statement that you get out of your teller, is a real significant problem. So in encompassing all aspects of this voter rights, voter-owned election package that you're looking at, I think it's really important you look at how you sell it back to the public, and selling it to the public in a way that's going to make them want to embrace it. And that terminology of voter ownership is a very successful perspective. Portland, Oregon has taken that on, and they've made it very much a part of how the public has increased in their turnout, because their participation and investment in the process is really bought into by the concept of their ownership of it. We have a culture that is based on, I'll be brief, that is based on ownership. We've heard it for 30, 40 years now, that being a good American is your ability to own something. It's time for us to put that ownership back into our government, in fact, into our election process, and to make sure that there's integrity and tied into it. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the speakers for bringing back the third piece of item 6, which is the voter cap piece, which I know Ms. Hahn is gone, and maybe we can have city staff report if there's any issues on that in terms of either financial or procedural. But if not, I don't want that to be lost, and that might be something that we can move forward on very quickly. Wayne, and why don't you come forward, since people do listen on the microphone. So,
Wayne Williams again. One last thing to minor correction to Joe's statement. Yes, statewide Prop 15 did fail. However, in Los Angeles, it did in fact receive a majority of the votes, and I want to personally thank the council for endorsing it.
Yep. Thank you, Wayne.
And thank you, Mr. Garcetti, and thank you for your support on these package of reforms. Our offices have worked closely in the development of this. I would appreciate your support. And I really enjoyed listening to the public speakers today. It's very informative, and it speaks to a number of issues that today probably we can't really take up. But I do have to excuse myself as well. I'm not sure if you're going to conclude the meeting. I have to run over to Eagle Rock. It's not as far as Wilmington, but
you're late too.
I'm late too. But I did want to say this, that removing the cap on the matching funds, after we had a forum on public financing of campaigns, wanted to go full force, 100 miles per hour, and get this done in the city of LA. And watching Prop 15 that it didn't pass, we were more committed to it in the forum. However, we recognize that there are some certain steps we need to take in order for the city of Los Angeles to have full public financing of campaigns. Removing the cap is a very important but first step in doing that. We recognize that it's not getting us where we would like to get, but it's a very essential step to get there. And I think we have, if we should get it out to the March 2011 ballot, we have a lot of work to do in terms of explaining what this means to the public, because it's still very technical nature, and why do this and what does it mean, but I think it's a very important step to getting us where we want to get.
So on the last part of 6, as a communication from the chair, since I'm the last surviving voting member of this committee here, I will instruct the city attorney to work with the CLA on drafting that piece on the lifting of the cap, and if the CLA will consult the CAO on any financial implications. There really shouldn't be any, but I know that question will come up. Since it's really about the cap, and if the money's not there, but it allows, if there is money there, to be spent above the cap. But just consult the CAO so we can have some sort of, statement of financial impact when this comes before the full council.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Great, thank you. All right, we have 2 more items left, and thank you very much, Mr. Wesar.
Thank you.
We have items. Yes.
The package we just discussed, and the other items are coming back on the 20th.
Yes, 20th. Yep. Let's take up items 4 and 4 first.
Item number 4 is motion Garcetti, Krikorian, Koretz, Reyes, Rosendahl on a proposal to revise the city charter to add a new provision which would prohibit campaign contributions from entities that are bidding on city contracts.
Thank you. If we can have the Ethics Commission come up first. We do have 3 cards on this item as well. So this is my motion with Mr. Krikorian, also Mr. Kretz and Reyes and Rosendahl. And this was something that is not as new as it may seem, in that this was a discussion we had a few years back. The MTA has a contributions policy that I think then Mayor Hahn kind of replicated, brought forward to committee after he was no longer mayor. We had it in here, and there was some advice from the city attorney that may, although it's not been challenged, I don't think of the MTA, that it may be so broad as to be. And why the city attorney maybe come up, we can have you both here. But certainly, given discussions recently, it just recurred to me that whether there's a reality of influence, even as big, if not even bigger, is the perception of influence that we saw with recent city contracts, that people who are bidding on contracts can give money to city office holders, and when they're running for things or for their office holder accounts, and that seems to taint the system. And what can we do to just get rid of that? But I also am very aware, as an elected official and on behalf of my colleagues, that we have a very complicated system. It takes many years, at least in my experience, to fully understand all the pieces of it, and the Ethics Commission does a great job of mandating training and doing the training, but even as such, I think we can all agree it's a complicated system to the average person, that the last thing I want to do is put an additional onus on the elected officials, but why not on folks who want to do business with the city of Los Angeles, put the onus on them that they simply have to agree not to give to city candidates or city elected officials. So this is a motion to move that idea forward and to see if we might be able to put that as part of a larger reform package for this spring. So this too is not necessarily going to be moving today in committee, but we need to understand some of the issues. So I don't know if either of you wants to start first on some of your initial impressions, having gone through this before. What are the issues we need to look at? We've consulted also with advocates who've given us input on, initially I was thinking in my own head, it's the practice that I try to use myself as well, which is if I know somebody's doing business in my district, it's 6 months before, 6 months after. I don't accept any campaign contributions. It's difficult to do the before because we never know what sort of RFP is going to come up, and how can we predict that? How can a company know even 6 months ahead before they decide to bid on something? But certainly when we know an RFP is opening up, that can be a good trigger for something, and potentially through the life of the contract and or beyond for some period of time to prohibit those contributions. Are there any First Amendment issues? Would there be any challenges to that? And what might be your suggestions for fleshing some of that out? So who wants to have at it first?
Good afternoon, Council Member. Deputy City Attorney Renee Stottle. Yes, we have spent a lot of time looking at this issue a few years ago. I would say currently, because of the status of campaign finance law in the country right now, there's a lot of legal challenges on all sorts of campaign finance rules, and so even since the time that we looked at the issue back in 2005, there have been more court cases, and while some provisions have been upheld, others have been struck down, and as a general matter, the provisions on contractor or contract bidder contribution bans have generally had to be, if they're to be upheld, or they've been struck down because they're not narrowly crafted because of the severe restriction on First Amendment rights, being able to give to candidates. And so there are a number of areas that have to be looked at in terms of narrow tailoring. The issue is that we have to have a proper governmental purpose in order to impose the restriction. And in order to have a proper governmental purpose, it has to be, to avoid corruption or the appearance of corruption, which is the only governmental purpose recognized by the Supreme Court. So therefore, it has to only apply to those contributions and those contracts where there is that possibility of inappropriate influence. where those candidates or officials may be in a role of participating in deciding the contract or reviewing the contract. There may be types of contracts that don't raise that question. Maybe low bid contracts don't raise the issue of potential for influence because they're awarded solely on the basis of low bid.
There's also the difference between RFPs and RFQs, which, you know, stable of folks that are qualified for something, and you never know who's going to get it because the department ultimately has the discretion then when they need them.
Right, and then the temporal nature of the restriction, I have to do a little bit more looking at that. I know definitely there's been at least one court that struck down a really long prohibition, which was the length of the contract plus 2 years.
Where was that? Do you know?
I think that was the Colorado case, but I'm not entirely sure. The restriction that we had looked at here before in the city, and actually one that we have in a very narrow section of our charter, which applies to underwriters for revenue bonds for our proprietary departments in non-competitive bid situations. So the one in our charter is a 12-month restriction. The one that we had looked at here before was a 6-month restriction from the time a person actually bid until 6 months after the contract was awarded. And other local jurisdictions in California have something either that ends when the contract is actually awarded or some short period of time thereafter.
And just to, make this a little bit more of a discussion, one of my concerns would be that, yeah, if we have a long prohibition, which I would naturally instinctively go towards what you have, you know, hypothetically, Hertz wins a contract with us. They can't for 3 years in that contract be donating, but Avis and Enterprise can be the whole time. They've lost, they can be bidding. And you want to talk about, you know, then the influence that they could have is they could actually be, you know, everybody hates Hertz by the end of it. And you have a group of folks who are saying, well, we love all these donations from Avis and Enterprise, let's give it to one of them. So we wouldn't want it to have the unintended consequence of kind of flipping it. So.
The other area that has to be looked at in terms of the restriction is who's prohibited from giving. And so as a general matter with these restrictions, not only is the entity prohibited from giving, but certain key top officials of the company are prohibited from giving. Some restrictions have been applied broader than that. I know that in the other charter provision that we have, it also applies to 10% owners of the company. A provision in Connecticut that was upheld was a 5% owner of a company. The Ethics Commission's previous proposal was a 3% owner of a company, which might be kind of low. And there have been some jurisdictions that have applied it to also to spouses and immediate family members of the people who are also of the officials of a company. So that's the other aspect that has to be looked at in terms of how it needs to be drafted.
Okay. Other thoughts? Go ahead.
Yes, Heather Holt with the Ethics Commission. We have just started to talk about this again. This is a long-standing issue of interest for the Ethics Commission, and we support the possibility of a ban, but there are some questions from a policy perspective in addition to the legal concerns that I think need to be addressed, such as who would it apply to, not just in terms of who is an agent for the bidder, what percentage ownership qualifies you, but are we talking about subcontractors too? Because you could have a situation where the prime is prohibited, but boy, you can funnel a lot of money through the subs. And then to which contracts would it apply? Are we talking about contract amendments or extensions? Are we talking about leases or permits? So those kinds of things, as well as some logistical issues. When the commission made its recommendations previously in 2005, the recommendation was to ban not just contributions, but also fundraising activities. So that's something to think about because that can generate much more money than a direct personal contribution.
I mean, obviously we have a prohibition on lobbyists donating, but they can still raise, which
correct. Correct.
I think they're all happy with the provision because they don't have to cut any checks themselves, but they can still.
We have heard that very common, actually.
But you know, in terms of what entities, if you cut off the raising as well, I think some the subs and things like that. I mean, it's going to be, I would think, rare that some sub by their own thoughts themselves are going to come out and start donating. So you may be able to address that through some prohibition. But
Yep.
presumably, part of the reason we didn't have the the reason we didn't have all fundraising activities prohibited had something to do also with what the legal challenge is. So
Yeah,
we
the
rely
right
on
to
both of you.
participate, speak with money in campaigns, yeah. So that's something else that should be addressed. Also, at the time that the commission made its previous recommendation, the mayor's office, the then mayor's office, was involved in putting together a centralized database of contracts that had information about bidders and contractors. That has not materialized. And so because we don't have a centralized database of information about who's contracting with the city, that could pose some enforcement and compliance issues that would need to be thought through. There are other issues like what is an appropriate penalty if somebody gives in violation of a ban or does fundraising in violation of a ban. What about the possibility of debarring that person from bidding on contracts for a certain period of time? How would we educate people about this requirement? Because in contrast to the education for city officials regarding conflict of interest issues, for example, it's a finite universe, but the world of possible bidders is much greater than that. And there might also be some technical issues regarding other existing laws that would need to be amended or eliminated possibly, such as the current requirement that contractors give notice or disclose when they have made contributions to elected officials, when they have a matter before that official, when they've engaged in fundraising. So just some technical cleanup things. The Ethics Commission is meeting on October 12th, and we plan to present these issues to them so that they have an opportunity to weigh in, so we can get more.
What time is it?
The meeting's at 9:30.
I
So
think
we
have the ERC meeting, unfortunately. I'd like to try to stop by maybe and say something to them
Okay.
so they can hear some of the intent behind it. But
Yeah, they'd love to
Yeah.
hear from you.
all right.
The other thing that I'll just note in passing is that this Friday we are actually starting a study with USC's Public Policy Department to look at whether there is any correlation between contracting with the city and campaign contributions. Unfortunately, the timing doesn't help in terms of a March ballot measure, but this coming spring we will have more data about whether there are pay-to-play patterns in the city's contracting.
Are you looking at both directions of that? I mean, it could be that you have a preponderance of money. You can also post state contracts like as a confirmation rather than a
Yes.
influencing of. So
Exactly.
the date on the methodology should be pretty important too. But that's exciting. I'm glad to hear that. Why don't we take a little public testimony then, because there's obviously a lot of things to do, and we have enough time to do it, but in a relatively short time. Kathy Fung. Batting 1,000 so far. And Trent, come on back. And after that will be Dr. Clyde Williams.
My name's Kathy Fung. I'm with the California Common Cause. We are 100%, 110% in support of this motion. I will just say that we've actually been talking about this idea and think that it's the right message to send to the public, that whether or not there's real corruption or just the appearance, it's important to not have that appearance of corruption. I think that there is sort of the additional question that you asked about timing, and I do think that it's important to think about timing after the contract has been given, and it might be a 6-month period or something like that, because you don't want a situation where just after the contract is given, somehow there's a donation and
Right.
you have the appearance.
Right.
Additionally, we think that you could provide greater disclosure by requiring people who are donating to a candidate's campaign to answer a simple question, and it could be a checkbox on the donation slip that says something like, do you or are you currently employed by an entity that has a contract with the City of Los Angeles? And what that does then is for reporting and disclosure purposes, the city ethics could immediately, just on the forms that are revealed online, if somebody had checked that box, then it's available for the public to see. And then additionally, for candidates who are receiving those funds, you can make a informed decision about whether it makes sense to accept that or not accept it because you don't want the appearance of there being any kind of influence. So it's all around something that with a simple checkbox added to a donation form could solve a lot of problems without getting into the problem of questions about nexus around regulations of people who are expressing their First Amendment rights.
Okay, great, thank you. 7 seconds to spare. Trent.
Trent.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank
to the gentleman.
Trent Lang, California Clean Money Campaign. We also are behind this 110%. Obviously, concern about things like contractors giving campaign contributions gets to the heart about the public's concern about potential pay to play. So this is a very important aspect. We also think that this meshes very nicely with the item 6 proposals on the charter amendments, and so I think these things all work well together, and combined with that package especially can help give the public a little bit more confidence. And we definitely agree with that part about looking not only at contracts that whether they currently have a contract, but looking forward to see whether they have in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Dr. Williams?
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno. Basically, you're trying to plug the holes up. However, having been in contracting, the contractor has many threads. The threads include their legal people, their suppliers, their subcontractors, their consultants. If you plug up one hole, will the money just flow through another hole? Through a lot of attorneys donate or contribute money to many people's elections. So would you also extend it from the contractor to their subcontractors? You could put a limit on the amount. And to their legal representatives, because they're usually under contract to the contractor. So my concern is that you may plug up one hole, but it'll just flow, the money will flow out through another hole. And individuals can still donate. So major employees of the contractor, will they be limited? It's difficult to say. So having experienced some in Montebello and the recent Bell situation, there's too many ways of trying to get the plugs in the holes. So I would highly recommend that the bidding contractors actually provide a list, which they usually do, of all the subcontractors. Anyone over a certain amount can't contribute. And then their legal representatives, and maybe even their CPAs, I don't know. So once you start pulling on the thread, it goes a long way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Yeah, Wayne,
Thank you, Councilmember Wayne Williams. I think this is a good idea in the context that Kathy mentioned, that it's an issue of perception. But the real bottom line here is, like Mr. Williams just said, we're playing whack-a-mole. And the bottom line ultimately is to take the politician out of the need to receive money. And the best way to do that, bar none, is to have publicly funded elections. And we have to figure out a way for Los Angeles to move in that direction, and the sooner the better. So if all of a sudden a candidate who runs for office does not have the need to receive funds from special interests or individuals who are looking for special deals to get from the city, we change the game right up front. And ideally, that's the way we want to go. So I hope we can move in that direction. Thank you for your time.
So do I. Very much. And keep working on my colleagues. What I would instruct, I know you are. What I would like to do is hold this in committee, instruct the city attorney, CLA, and the Ethics Commission to report back on recommendations along with draft ballot language. I will be actively involved in that and engage folks that are here today in that as well. I'll try to come to the commission meeting if ERC lets out in time. And and let the commissioners know, but we'd be interested in their suggestion on these lines. Just a few things on that I wrote down. I know this is public policy on the fly, but I think these are decent principles. I think the principles that I would ask us to look towards in kind of a framework at least is something that starts with where contracts begin and some amount of time has been expressed after the contract is awarded, of at least 6 months, I would say. You know, if city attorney says can't go much further than that but at least 6 months, I think we could probably comfortably do. Second, I would want the disclosure piece that was recommended as well, if we could incorporate that into people who are donating to be able to disclose, just as they have to do right now, their occupation and employer, whether they have contracts before the city. Again, how we define contracts and whether it's leases and everything we'll get to. Third, consideration as to whether fundraising activities should be banned as well by those entities, and by whom, whether it's just the companies or high-ranking officials and subcontractors. And based on that, maybe a threshold, a dollar amount is what we'd need to look at. One we could look at is what's triggered a vote. It's obviously the lowest threshold is 100,000 because it doesn't even come to us for a vote if it's under 100,000. So it becomes an irrelevant issue. But whether it would be 100,000 above or whether we go a slightly bit higher, but some sort of threshold and what sort of recommendations we might think through on that. So those are the main principles, I think. I think this is achievable. I'd like to give it a real good go again. I don't know where everybody's going to be on this on the council, but I think it's. I think we had 5 people sign it. There were a couple others that would have signed it as well, and that's as many as we can do under the Brown Act. So I think we start with close to 7 people that today are publicly saying they're for it. So I think we can get to enough people, but we got to design it the right way. So let's hold that and let's go on to the dreaded number 5.
Item number 5 is a report from the city attorney relative to repealing certain parts of the Los Angeles City Charter in light of recent Supreme Court decisions.
Trent, Kathy, Clyde, come on forward. Your thoughts? Because I'd love some creative thought of like, well, I don't have to do this, but.
Trent Lang, California Clean Money Campaign. The main comment is obviously this is necessary in light of the Citizens United court cases to move this forward, and that I think this works well with the public financing piece of item number 6. You just put that into the charter changes that about raising the trust fund and the other pieces. So I think it's needed, and it fits in well with the other charter pieces. That's the only comment here.
I haven't seen the actual recommended changes, but I think what they're aiming towards doing is eliminating the language that talks about provision of funds to candidates who are participating in the matching funds program when their opponent raises or puts in a certain amount of money, or when independent expenditure puts in a certain amount of money against them. And if that's the case, then we have seen, not necessarily Citizens United, but in another case, Davis, that warned against that type of matching system. The Supreme Court has not ruled definitively about it. However, I do about the kind of matching systems that we're talking about here. However, I do understand the city attorney's concern about wanting to avoid anything that would invite litigation. So for that reason, I think if in combination with some of the other reforms that we're talking about regarding removing the trust fund cap and other things that move us closer to a full public financing system, we were to consider this change, then I think that we would be in support of it.
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno. It's a difficult one. How can you impose certain rules on one section and not others? So I would highly recommend that you consider putting the controls or requiring candidates to list all of their contributions that they have received, rather than having the contributors have to submit as to what they have contributed.
We do.
We do. Okay. I'll make it.
It's available for the public on the City Ethics website.
Yeah. And so that was my basic, at least the contributors should be named from their side as to when they are contributing, especially the independent fundings. So again, it's a leaking boat. Thank you.
And they do, so rest assured on independent expenditures as well. For city elections, they do have to declare. I will move forward the city attorney report and request the city attorney to prepare ballot titles and resolutions necessary to place a charter amendment before the voters in March 2011, which enacts the proposed changes. Thank you to advocates who actually spoke up saying that we need to do this. I'll say this on the record. I don't want to do this. I think a lot of us don't want to do this. I'm going to have some council members who are going to vote against this, which I think under the circumstances is somewhat irresponsible, especially in bad budget times, to invite litigation and to it's one of those barnacle votes, I call them. You just kind of hang on because you know it's going to pass anyway, but you can on principle say, I don't like it. But I think we have all a responsibility based on the advice of our city attorney, and I think as advocates for good government and clean elections are saying that. Thank you for doing that, and I invite you to do that in council too, to remind those who might stray that we need to do this. Thank you. And with that, this is a special meeting, so we do not have a general public comment. On number 3, let's hold that too, pending the answers that were asked for as well, and we'll take those together with number 6. Okay. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.